There is a type of person who will shake your hand, smile at you, ask about your weekend, and walk away feeling quietly exhausted by your existence. Not because you did anything wrong, not because they are a bad person, but because somewhere along the way, other people stopped feeling safe to them. And so they learned to perform closeness while feeling something entirely different on the inside. This isn't a rare personality, it isn't a villain's trait. Psychology suggests it is actually one of the most quietly common patterns in adult social life. And understanding it, really understanding it, doesn't just explain the people around you. It may explain parts of yourself you've never quite had words for. Music. Have you ever sat across from someone at dinner, laughing, nodding, engaged in conversation, and felt somewhere beneath all of it a low hum of irritation you couldn't fully explain? Or have you ever watched a colleague receive praise and noticed a flicker of something cold pass through you before you pushed it back down and smiled? Most people, if they're honest, have felt this. A quiet contempt. A private exhaustion with other human beings that they would never say out loud. But for some people, this isn't occasional. It's constant, it's the default. It runs beneath every interaction like an underground current, hidden, unacknowledged, and deeply confusing even to the person experiencing it. Psychology does not call this evil, it calls it a pattern. And like most patterns in human behavior, it has a beginning. We tend to imagine that people who dislike others must show it somehow. That contempt announces itself, that it comes with a sharp tongue or a cold shoulder or an obvious arrogance. But research in social psychology suggests that the most sustained, deeply held forms of social contempt are often the most invisible ones. They live behind perfectly normal faces, behind people who are pleasant at work, polite at family gatherings, and quietly, privately, exhausted by every single person in the room. What creates this? What turns a person who was once, like every human, a child reaching out for connection, into an adult who has built, brick by brick, a wall between themselves and the rest of humanity? The answer is rarely one thing, it is almost always a layering, an accumulation. A series of moments that taken alone might seem minor but taken together taught the person a very specific lesson about other people. That lesson at its core is this: people will disappoint you, people will use you, people cannot really be trusted. And so the safest thing, the most intelligent thing, is to keep them close enough to function normally in the world but never close enough to cause real damage. Imagine a child who grows up in a home where emotional needs are treated as inconveniences. Not a dramatic home necessarily, not one filled with shouting or cruelty, but one where vulnerability is quietly discouraged, where asking for too much is met with withdrawal, where the unspoken rule is that feelings are something you manage privately, not something other people are expected to hold. That child learns early and efficiently that reaching toward people does not reliably produce warmth. It produces unpredictability, and unpredictability to a developing nervous system is a form of threat. So the child adapts, they become self-contained, they become observant, they learn to read people carefully not out of curiosity or affection but out of caution. Because when you cannot trust that connection will be safe, the next best thing is to become very good at anticipating when it will fail. Years pass, the child becomes an adult, and they carry that adaptation with them into every office, every relationship, every dinner table conversation. It no longer feels like a response to anything. It just feels like how they are. Realistic, they might say, clear-eyed, they've simply learned not to expect too much from people. But beneath that framing, psychology often finds something more complicated. It finds grief. The grief of someone who once wanted deeply to feel close to others and who, through enough disappointment, slowly gave up on that possibility. This is an important distinction. The person who secretly harbors contempt for everyone is not someone who never wanted connection. They are often someone who wanted it intensely and who was hurt enough times in that wanting that their mind made a calculated decision to stop wanting it so openly. The contempt is, in many cases, a protection, a way of getting ahead of the pain. If I already expect nothing from you, you cannot disappoint me. Research in attachment psychology supports this. When early relationships with caregivers, with peers, with the first people a child learns to trust are consistently unreliable or emotionally dismissive, individuals often develop what researchers call an avoidant or disorganized relational style. They don't lose the need for connection. They simply become deeply conflicted about it. They want closeness and distrust it simultaneously. And one of the ways that conflict resolves itself over time is through a quiet, generalized resentment toward others. Not toward any one person, toward people as a concept. And here's where it becomes particularly difficult to untangle, because the behavioral surface of this pattern looks entirely functional. This is not someone who isolates themselves visibly. They often show up. They often perform their social roles with real skill. They are present at the birthday party, the team meeting, the family dinner. But underneath the performance, something else is happening, a constant, low-grade monitoring, a silent judgment. A private narrative running parallel to the public one, in which other people are cataloged for their flaws, their selfishness, their predictable mediocrity. Consider a common workplace scenario. There is a person on the team who is always professional, always composed, who meets every deadline, participates in every meeting, and never causes visible conflict. But privately, they have a sharp internal commentary about almost every colleague. This one talks too much, that one takes credit, another one is liked only because of their politics. They say none of this aloud. They've learned that saying it aloud creates complications. But the commentary never stops. It's there when they arrive in the morning and still there when they leave. To anyone observing, this person seems perfectly fine. And in many practical senses they are. But the internal experience is one of chronic low-level exhaustion. Because maintaining that performance, being present without being genuine, being polite without being warm, takes an enormous amount of energy. And that energy is quietly, steadily depleted by every human interaction they have to get through. This exhaustion is one of the most telling signs of this pattern. Research on social motivation distinguishes between people who find interaction energizing and those who find it costly, not because they are introverts in the traditional sense, but because interaction requires them to manage a significant gap between what they feel and what they show. That gap is tiring. And the wider it grows, the more isolated the person becomes inside themselves, even when surrounded by people. But what happens on the inside? What does it actually feel like to carry this? Psychology suggests it is rarely comfortable. There is often a layer of guilt beneath the contempt, a recognition somewhere that feeling this way is not entirely fair, that the colleague they've dismissed internally is probably just a human being trying to get through their day, that the friend they're quietly resenting hasn't actually done anything unforgivable. There is a part of the person that knows this, and that part produces a steady background noise of shame. There is also loneliness. This is perhaps the most painful irony of this pattern. The very defense mechanism built to protect against pain ends up creating a different, deeper kind of pain, because no one gets in. The walls that were built to keep people from causing harm also keep genuine connection from forming. And so the person exists in a kind of relational limbo, present in every social sense but privately unreachable. And they often know it. They can see, sometimes with remarkable clarity, that they are not connecting, that the people around them are operating under a version of them that isn't really them. They may feel in their most honest moments like a ghost moving through a world of living people, visible enough, functional enough, but not quite real in the way they suspect other people are real to each other. This is where the pattern becomes most important to understand with compassion rather than judgment. Because what looks from the outside like someone who dislikes people, someone cold or arrogant or dismissive, is often, from the inside, someone who is profoundly lonely and doesn't know how to stop being so. There is also something that behavioral researchers have observed quite consistently in this pattern, and it is worth sitting with. The person who carries generalized contempt for others often holds themselves to the same standard or a harsher one. The internal critic that narrates other people's failings rarely falls quiet when it turns inward. The same exacting eye that finds everyone else lacking tends to find the self lacking too. What presents as contempt for others is frequently, at its root, a deep and unresolved contempt for self. The outward judgment is easier to live with than the inward one, and so it gets projected again and again onto the people passing through their field of vision. This is not a conscious process. It is not something this person decides to do. It is something their psychology does for them automatically in the background, the way the body regulates temperature without being asked. And this matters because it reframes the question entirely. The question is not simply, why does this person dislike everyone? The deeper question is, what does this person believe about themselves that makes the world feel like such an unsafe place to be known in? Think about what it would mean to be truly seen by another person, to let someone close enough to know your actual thoughts, your actual fears, your actual contradictions. For most people, this is simply intimacy. For someone carrying this pattern, it is a different kind of risk entirely. Because being known means being evaluated, and being evaluated, they have learned, tends to produce rejection. So the logic, however unconscious, becomes, if I reject first, if I maintain distance through contempt, then the rejection I've been waiting for never quite arrives. I am in control of the distance. There is a version of this that plays out in close relationships particularly clearly. Someone who fits this pattern may enter a relationship with genuine investment, may feel early on something real, but as the relationship deepens, as the other person gets closer, the contempt begins to surface. Small things become evidence of larger failings. The partner's habits, their social style, their way of expressing emotion begin to be quietly cataloged and found insufficient, not always expressed. Not always consciously noticed, but there underneath, eroding the connection from below. And often the person doesn't fully understand why this happens. They may genuinely want the relationship to work. They may genuinely care about the other person, but some part of their psychology cannot tolerate the vulnerability that real closeness requires, and so it begins automatically to build a case against staying close. It manufactures reasons to maintain distance. Contempt is an efficient way to do this. It is very hard to feel close to someone you have decided, at some fundamental level, is beneath you. This is one of the most painful aspects of this pattern to witness and to experience. The person may end relationship after relationship, friendship after friendship, wondering why nothing ever feels quite right, why no one ever quite measures up, without recognizing that the measuring itself is the problem, that the standards being applied are not really standards at all. They are exits, ways out of the vulnerability of being known. So where does this end? Does it end? Psychology does not offer simple resolutions, but research consistently points toward the same beginning of a different direction, and that beginning is awareness, not self-blame, not shame about the shame, but a genuine, quiet recognition that the contempt being directed outward is asking a question that has nothing to do with other people. It is asking, am I safe? Can I be known? Will connection destroy me or hold me? Those are the real questions, and they are not answered by finding better people or higher quality relationships. They are answered by doing the slower, harder work of examining the original experiences that made other people feel dangerous, of tracing the pattern back to its source, of recognizing that the child who learned not to need anyone learned that lesson in a specific context, and that context no longer exists, that the protection made sense then, and that it is now costing more than it is providing. This kind of recognition doesn't happen quickly, and it rarely happens alone, but it does happen. Research in neuroplasticity tells us clearly that the brain continues to change throughout life. That patterns laid down in early experience can be examined, challenged, and gradually rewired through consistent new experience. Every time a person with this pattern chooses to let something genuine through, to admit to someone that they are struggling, to receive care without immediately deflecting it, to sit with closeness instead of manufacturing distance, the nervous system registers something new. That connection did not destroy them. That being known did not end in the rejection they were bracing for. These moments don't undo years of pattern overnight, but they accumulate, quietly the same way the original wounds accumulated, but in the opposite direction. And perhaps the most important shift of all is learning to turn the same analytical attention that has been directed outward at the failings and disappointments of other people inward, not as self-punishment, but as honest inquiry. To ask, what do I actually feel beneath the contempt? What am I actually afraid of? What would it mean to need someone and have that be okay? Because here is the quiet truth at the center of all of this. The person who secretly resents everyone is not someone who has given up on people. They are someone who once cared so much about people, who once needed connection so urgently that when it failed them enough times, they had to find a way to survive that failure. And the way they found was distance, dressed up as judgment, disguised as self-sufficiency. But underneath it always is the original longing, unchanged, patient, still there. The contempt is not the truth of who they are. It is the armor over the truth. And armor, however heavy, can eventually be set down, not all at once, and not without difficulty, but piece by piece in the presence of safety over time. If you recognize this pattern in yourself not as a verdict but as a description, then perhaps the most useful thing psychology offers is this. The wall you built was not a mistake, it was intelligence applied to a painful situation. But you are no longer in that situation. And intelligence, when it is truly working in your interest, eventually asks whether the strategy still fits the life. The people who struggle most with this pattern are not the people who feel too little. They are the people who long ago felt too much, and learned to hide it so well that eventually, even they forgot it was there. If this reflected something you've seen in yourself or someone close to you, share your thoughts in the comments below. These conversations matter, and sometimes, simply naming a pattern is the first step towards something different.